Welcome to Rooted and Ready from Annie's Project, where we share real conversations about risk, resilience, and the decisions shaping agriculture. I'm your host, Karisha Devlin. I'm a farmer and training and curriculum officer with Annie's Project. Today's format is going to be different from our previous episodes. We've decided to create something new and roll out episodes based on listener request. So, a couple weeks ago, we received a request for an episode on cash rent. It's a topic that can affect profitability, relationships, and long-term farm or ranch success. There are a lot of variables that go into determining a cash rent: land productivity, where in the country you're located, what type of ag operation you have. Is this a crop operation, pasture, you're ranching, production cost, market dynamics? The challenge with doing this episode or talking about cash rent is that there isn't one correct rental rate. Every situation is going to be different. And so, in today's conversation, we're going to take a decision making approach to help you understand questions you should be asking rather than me telling you what your rent should be. If you've ever wondered whether a rental rate is fair, how rates are determined, or what questions to ask before signing a lease, this episode is for you. Let's get started. Cash rent isn't just another expense line. For many operations, rented acres make up a significant portion of the land being farmed or ranched. At the same time, farmland may be one of a family's largest assets. When you're sitting down to determine a fair rental rate, that's going to involve balancing economics, risk, local market conditions, relationships, because that decision is going to affect the overall farm profitability. It's going to affect your income for the landowner, family relationships, and long-term sustainability. The challenge, again, is that there isn't just one correct rental rate. And I know that probably is frustrating for you to hear. In a previous career that I had, I worked over 20 years with University of Missouri Extension. This was one of the questions that came in regularly from both landowners and tenants. And everybody wants to know what is that one correct rental rate. But again, every farm, field, and situation is different. So let's talk about what actually determines rental rates. One of the first questions I would get when I would have these conversations with landowners or tenants is, what is everyone else paying? We always want to know, right? We always want to know what somebody else is doing, what our competition is, what are the going rates? Well, there's several ways you can find that out. Of course, there's always going to be the gossip going around about what rental rates are, what so and so is paying. There's also a great resource that's out there. USDA puts out some information about rental rates, what county rental rates are. Uh, You also have your local extension office. Contact them. They usually have a guide sheet or some document that is put together that summarizes rental rates that are going on within the state. And sometimes those are broken down by county, but a lot of times they may have those more kind of a regional aspect to give you just a guideline. Again, those are guidelines. It gives you usually a range depending on what type of ground, whether it's crop, pasture, or even hunting ground. They may have that broken out for your state. But those are some great resources to get started on. Again, those are based on surveys that are sent out, so data that they're getting back. It may not, I would not base your decision just solely on them, but it's a great resource, a way to get started to kind of get an idea of what some of the going rates may be. There's also several factors that influence rental rates. Productivity. Higher producing ground is going to command higher rent. That's just a fact. And that is sometimes hard to explain to landowners because everybody has the best ground in the county. They would come in and, be like, well, my ground, I've got good ground. And so we'd have to have a conversation. How do you know you have good ground? So some questions for you to ask, whether you are, either in the landowner or the tenant situation, is just what are the average yields on that ground? What is the soil productivity? I would always encourage folks to get soil tests. Get regular soil tests so you have a baseline on what that productivity is. And then, when you're entering into that relationship with a tenant, you're asking that person to keep up the fertility at that level, or you're asking the person to build up the fertility if it needs to be built up on your farm. Are there drainage improvements? There's there tiling, there terraces that are on that property. If you have pasture, what's the fencing situation on that property? Are there water sources? So some of those are questions to ask and to think about because it really factors in to what that bottom line, that cash rent is going to be. Markets are something else that affects cash rental rates. Commodity prices are going to influence what farmers can afford to pay. So when grain prices rise, rental rates are often going to follow and they're going to start getting high. When grain prices fall, rent discussions are going to start becoming more difficult because it's going to be harder for farmers to make that payment. If they're getting low prices for their commodities, going to start affecting their cash flow. It's it's a hard discussion to have because landowners, they usually, they are depending on that rental income. Maybe they're retired, and so they're depending on that rental income as a money source in their retirement. Maybe they're depending on it for a certain rate of return on their investment. And so, those discussions can be challenging when having them to talk about, can we lower that cash rent down for this period? Some other things is competition. I mentioned that a few minutes ago. There's a lot of competition for land. That was one of the ones that drove a lot of the discussions that I would have with tenants in particular is so and so is renting ground. They're going around the county. They're paying X amount of cash rent. I have to offer more. I even had a situation many years ago where a farmer came in to talk to me, and he was sharing about a person that was in actually the adjoining county that person came over and rented a farm that was across the street from this farmer's home. And he really took an affront at that this guy was coming into the county and bidding these high cash rental rates and was able to get the farm that was across the street from where he lived, the farmer talking to me. And so what he did then, he went to this farmer's county. He went to the adjacent county and basically did the same thing. He tried to outbid this farmer kind of like as a I'll get back to you. And the whole situation made no sense as far as a good business decision. I mean, it was based on I'm upset at you, I'm going to get back at you, I'm going to outbid you so I can rent this ground from underneath you. And there was egos that got pulled involved there. And definitely not something that was made good business sense or worked for his cash flow. So don't let yourself ever get pulled into that situation. I know that everybody wants to hang on to the ground they have, and that in order to even to grow and with economies of scale, with your equipment and maybe it's even the cattle that you're raising, you're trying to spread things across more acres. But in the end, you have to think about what makes sense for you, what is going to cash flow. When you do have areas that have strong competition for farmland, you're going to see those higher rental rates. But you also need to think about some other things that go into that. And so some of those things that would again be a conversation you would have with a landowner is things like lime. Who's going to pay for lime? Who's responsible for keeping up the fertility? With lime, usually that has been a landowner expense because it has such a long carryover life. But in a lot of instances, especially if you enter into a longer term lease, 3 to 5 year lease, uh, the tenants are willing to pay for the lime expense. But if it's just a year to year lease, then they're really going to expect the landowner to pay for that because, or they're may or may not get the full use out of that lime that they're going to put up on the ground. There's other um, fertility. Again, I would uh, really encourage you to do the soil test so you can make sure that that fertility in the ground is kept up. If somebody is going to bid a high cash rent, and I'm talking to all you landowners out there, if some of there's some people that may bid high cash rents, and if they're trying to cut corners anywhere, one of the ways that they may cut corners is on fertility. They may not be fertilizing the ground like they should be. So a soil test is a way that both parties can make sure that they're understanding what the expectations are and to make sure that the fertility is being kept up on that ground. Conservation practices, that's another conversation to have. Who's going to pay for improvements with those? Again, those drainage issues, fencing, if there's fencing that needs to be kept up, or even maybe there's fencing that's really poor and needs to be repaired or improved upon before putting cattle on that ground. Those are some things that need to come into that consideration. Those investments really can influence what is considered fair when it comes to determining a cash rental rate. So here's some questions that I think matter most when you're having those discussions. The first one is, can this rental rate work financially over time? Again, that's kind of coming back to the earlier discussion about the commodity prices changing. Sometimes rent decisions are made during good years, but sustainable decisions need to be made to survive average years or even difficult years. And one of the ways that you can make sure that those conversations are had or you're revisiting them is to revisit your lease every year, even if you have a long-term lease. Have a check-in every year with your landowner to see if those rental rates need to be adjusted any. Some of the things you can consider is your cost of production, what working capital you have, any debt obligations, your machinery cost, family living expenses. I feel like family living is something that our farmers don't pay as much attention to as they should, and that it really adds up to more than people think about. So don't forget about it. But when you're looking at all of those things, you're revisiting your lease every year, you really want to make sure that that lease that you're coming up with is going to support long-term health for both parties, that perhaps it's giving that rental income or that return on investment that the landowners need. But it's also something that is feasible and can cash flow for that tenant. Something else to think about is communication. And we talked about leases last week, and that really dovetails well into this episode. So if you didn't have a chance to listen to that episode, I really encourage you to go back and listen to it. One of the things we really drove home in that is the importance of communication. And I think one aspect of cash rent that doesn't get discussed enough is along this communication lines. A lot of rental relationships last decades, last several years. And having a strong relationship between a tenant and landowner is going to be built on having those regular conversations, even sometimes they're difficult conversations. Being transparent. There's so many landowners that I've talked to over the years that didn't even know the yields that they had on their ground because the tenant wasn't wanting to share those. And so, that could create some distrust there. What are they hiding from me? Why don't they want me to know those yields? Just having clear expectations. And again, getting something in writing is so important. And like we said last week, we stressed several times, so I won't get into that today. But written agreements just really help both parties stay on the same page. Everybody knows what expectations are, and it not only helps those parties, but also your family members or partners, anybody else that could be involved in that operation. Everybody is singing from the same hymnal. And some of the most successful landowner-tenant relationships, they're going to involve the annual conversations, even when no changes are being proposed. But again, just touch and base, how the farm is doing, what improvements are being made, how are those yields? Are there any challenges? Do we need to tweak anything on the farm? Are there any conservation practices that need to be put into place? Those conversations really build trust, and trust can become just as valuable as that rental rate themselves. So before you agree to rent, whether you're the landowner or the tenant, consider these questions. What information am I using? And I'm relying on data. And again, really encourage you to contact your local extension office because they have that data. They can supply that data that can be useful to you when you're making those decisions. And again, that would be cash rental rates. It could be information on conservation practices. If you have questions, you can get soil tests done through your extension offices. So, you know, rely heavily on them. They're such an excellent resource for you. Is this sustainable? Will this arrangement still make sense if conditions change? And then lastly, have we clearly discussed expectations? Have both parties talked about goals, responsibilities, and communication? I can't stress this one enough, and it comes back again to just making sure everybody's on the same page, that the landowner understands where the tenant's coming from, and the tenant understands where the landowner is coming from. When it comes to cash rental rates, the goal isn't simply finding that highest number or the lowest number. The goal is finding an arrangement that works for the land, for the farm business, and for the people involved. The best agreements are often built on a combination of good information, realistic expectations, and strong communication. Again, I strongly encourage you to arm yourself with information, whether you are the tenant or the landowner, and that you're not just, throwing figures out based on what you're hearing in the community as a tenant, because you're trying to make sure that you are renting ground above what somebody else in the community is doing, that you're making that from a solid business decision, that you know your numbers, you know what you have to work with, you know your cash flow situation. And from the landowner, that you're not just renting ground based on the highest number that somebody is throwing out there. One of the things that I saw over and over is that landowners would rent ground to somebody that, they didn't know or didn't know much about. And that person sometimes did not make payments regularly. In a few situations, landowners got burned really bad. They never got any money at all. And they were, constantly chasing after that person, even having to take them to kind of a small claims court to try to get money out of them. So, you definitely don't want to be in that sort of situation. For the landowner, I often recommend if you're going to rent ground to somebody, ask them for references, ask them from other landowners that they work with. They shouldn't have a problem sharing that information. And so you can kind of check up on them. Again, it's just a good business practice on your end as well. Go to your extension office, call your extension office, and ask for a cash rental rate guide sheet. Ask them if they have other documents that can be supportive or help you in making these decisions. If you don't have a county office, or if you're having trouble reaching somebody that can help you, Google it. You can Google cash rental rates, extension, Missouri, cash rental rates, extension, Idaho, cash rental rates, extension, Florida, wherever you are in the country, you could Google that. And you, if they do have, which they should have, a document, whether it's a guide sheet or some other format. Some states have really great spreadsheets that you can use that can help you calculate cash rent for a variety of in a variety of ways. One that comes to mind really quickly that I've personally used at Iowa State, they have a cash rental rate calculator, and they have different ways that you can calculate cash rent, kind of based on different scenarios. One that they have is a corn indexed, and that is not applicable for anyone unless you live within Iowa. So just FYI there. But it has a lot of different ways to look at how cash rent can be calculated. There's other states that have one as well, so be on the lookout for there. Again, if you contact your local extension office, they can point you in that right direction. Thank you for listening to Rooted and Ready from Annie's Project. If you have a question or topic idea for a future episode, we'd love to hear about it. You can reach out to me at Karisha at anniesproject.org. That's Karisha at anniesproject.org. Or you can go to our website, anniesproject.org, and we have a feature where you can contact us through the website. You can click on there and send in your request. Share this episode with a friend, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and join us next time for more conversations about risk, resilience, and agricultural livelihoods. Until next time, stay rooted in what matters and ready for what's next.